Nicknames are everywhere. You, yes, you watching this, you've probably got one, and it was probably given to you by your family, a friend, or a significant other. People throughout the ages have always gone by more than one name. I've gained several over my years, and I've even been the one that's given them to other people. There's many reasons to give a nickname. Sometimes it's to differentiate between people who've all got the same birth name. Now, while on this channel I'm known as Matt, when I go back home or see my family or old friends, I'm referred to as something completely different. Matt was a common name when I grew up, so I'd often be referred to as my nickname and not my birth one. Now, sometimes nicknames can be a variation on your surname, and sometimes it's the case where a nickname is descriptive. It's given because of a character trait that you have, or it's something to do with your appearance. Or, in the case of the most interesting ones, it's because of some crazy event or something that you took part in or something you did. So you're probably asking right now, Matt, why are you bringing this up? Well, it turns out that Jesus was a fan of giving out nicknames to all sorts of people. Ones which we now use without realising that they are in fact nicknames. The Apostle Peter was not actually called Peter, he was called Simon. Peter was Jesus' nickname for him, which he took on as his new name. Anyone who's been following this series will know that the apostles were known by many names, but there's one instance where Jesus called two guys by the same nickname, and probably the coolest nickname he ever gave out at that. And this belonged to James and John, the sons of thunder. The question is, of course, why would Jesus give these two such a metal nickname? Well, this is evidently one of those descriptive nicknames. When Jesus met them on the shores of Galilee, he would soon realise just how intense they were. Just like Peter and Andrew, John and James were brothers, and they were among some of Jesus' first followers, becoming his loyal disciples and then following on and becoming apostles. These two sons of Zebedee were all in for the cause, and were not shy in calling down some extreme action on people. Jesus probably had to tell them to calm down and chill out on more than one occasion. So, it's no wonder that he referred to these two zealous gents as the Sons of Thunder. This time I'm covering two apostles in one go, and there's a good reason for that which will become clear. So first off, let's talk about James. Now this guy is known as James the Greater, but not because he was better at discipling or more important, but simply because he was just older than a certain other James in the group. Or he might have been taller than him. Either way, he was one of the first to join Jesus, and like his brother, he would take part in some key events in his ministry, such as the Transfiguration. The two brothers shared Peter's curiosity, and they were not shy in asking questions. One such question was, "Can we sit at your left and right side in the coming kingdom, Jesus?" And this was a request that actually earned them a bit of a scolding off him. James does not get much more of a mention in Scripture, but Luke is sure to mention one very specific in his book of Acts. Much like his fellow apostles, James was brought before Herod in 44 CE, most likely for upsetting people with preaching. Unlike his peers, however, he did not escape the king's clutches, and Luke records that Herod had him executed with a sword, and James became the first of the apostles to become a martyr. There are, of course, traditions and legends of James, but the most significant tradition is that of his journey to far-off Spain to preach the gospel, and this has led to him being regarded as the patron saint of Spain. The legend goes that he preached both in Israel and Judea for a bit, then set off for Spain, and after his demise, his remains were returned there by his followers. There is, of course, a little bit of a tangle here. Paul also wanted to go to Spain because nobody had been there yet, and this is something that he states in his letter to the Romans. But to avoid offending people, let's just remember that news travelled really slowly back then, and text and email wouldn't be invented for another millennium or so. So it may be that he'd gone there and Paul just hadn't heard of it yet. James's story then was cut short, quite literally, but his brothers would continue to become one worthy of the Sons of Thunder, and he is in fact the bridge between the period of the Apostles and the time of the Church Fathers, who all testified that he would indeed go on to outlive all of his fellow apostles, as predicted by Jesus. John, of course, was the younger of the two brothers, and he was also the youngest of all the apostles. He and his brother were the sons of Zebedee and Salome, who in tradition were Jesus' aunt and uncle, which made the brothers Jesus' cousin. Several bits of the New Testament are attributed to John, such as 3 letters, John 1, 2 and 3, the Gospel of John, and that crazy ride, which is the Apocalypse of John, which you might know better as the Book of Revelation. Eusebius, in his church histories, confirms that John at least wrote the Gospel and at least that first letter, but he wasn't too sure about the rest. Let's talk about John's Gospel quickly. This Gospel is unique amongst the 4 in that it's, well, absolutely nothing like the other 3. It's written like an eyewitness account, and it lays on the message of Jesus' divinity pretty thick from the get-go. The time frame is different as well, referencing at least 3 Passover festivals, instead of the Synoptics' 1. It does not name John as the author, and the theory is that, like the others, he realised this was not his story to tell, but Jesus's. That was the one that was important, not who was bringing it. The Gospel does mention a guy quite frequently, a chap called the disciple who Jesus loved, which is how it's believed John was trying to avoid coming across as being that guy who name drops all the time. Oh, well, like, we were chilling in Judea, and then me and Jesus were doing this, and then me and Jesus did that. The Gospel only sneakily reveals that the guy, this disciple who Jesus loved, was the one that had written the Gospel at the conclusion of it. So what about John's ministry then? Well, it seemed that he floated around 2 places spreading his message, Judea and then Ephesus. However, when the Roman Emperor Domitian came to power, he was shipped off to the Isle of Patmos, which is where he would receive his famous vision and write the Book of Revelation. He would die of old age, but not before he taught several men who would go on to shape the church after the apostles had all gone, notably Polycarp and Ignatius of Antioch. It might seem a bit odd that the 2 guys with quite possibly the most cool nickname in Scripture don't really have that much of an interesting story between them. There's no crazy miracles, there's no stories about Jesus selfies, and there's no trips to far-off lands like India. But I do reckon that it is an appropriate nickname, and here's my opinion on it. Lightning is a short-lived phenomenon, a flash, and then it is gone, much like Jesus' ministry was. But after the lightning comes the thunder, and sometimes that can travel for miles around and inform people of a storm that they can't even see. Much like the thunder after they're named, James and John caused many to hear about this particular lightning strike. James's death made many Christians flee the city, and they ended up sharing the message. John, of course, was more like one of those rumbling thunders. Long after the strike had passed, he was still making all the noise. So perhaps their nickname is appropriate after all. So, from one set of fishermen, let's go to another. One of the guys who was one of the first disciples of Jesus was Andrew, so it's going to be him that we'll be covering next. So, as always, do all the like, share and subscribe-y things. Go grab yourself a drink, and keep asking questions.